Welcome back to the Gun Collective Podcast. My name is Jon Patton, boys and girls. We've got another amazing guest this week. I'm telling you, I say this all the time. It's another great guest because we wouldn't have, I guess we wouldn't have bad guests on the show. That would not be great. But first, I got to plug some sponsors. Go to blackoutcoffee.com/TGC and go buy some stuff. If you go to blackoutcoffee.com/TGC and buy stuff, it helps support this show. It helps support TGC. And you are supporting a company that says stay awake, not woke. Blackoutcoffee.com/TGC. Also go to vertex.com and use the code TGC at their website. The code is TGC at vertx.com. Get yourself a bag, some EDC gear, maybe some clothing. Vertex.com. The code is TGC. That's enough of that. Travis White of the group called FRAC is with us today. Travis, how are you?
I'm good, John. Thanks for having me on.
Dude, I'm so excited about this. It's been a long time coming. I've been aware of FRAC for a long time, but I think the audience needs to kind of learn about you guys and absorb what you guys are up to because it's slightly different. So let's start at square one. What the hell is FRAC and what does that stand for?
Okay, so it stands for the Firearms Regulatory Accountability Coalition. We're a 501c6 trade organization. We were formed in late 2020 by some key people in the industry. We wanted to put together something to kind of do some pinpoint administrative accountability in the regulatory space for the industry. Let's see. So
that's a lot of big words to say. Like what's like the most simple way that you can talk about that? Like you want to punch Congress in the dick from the gun industry angle? Like what's the real take on that?
You know, we
I don't think that's on your business card.
Right. We look at we're distinct from the civil rights group, but there's a lot of overlap with the civil rights group, right? So whereas the civil rights groups are predominantly focused on the Second Amendment and liberties as to the people, the end consumer, right? We look at the industry and improving its business conditions. Now, obviously, there's tremendous overlap, and I have a wonderful relationship with the civil rights groups. We see eye to eye. So, you know, some might say it's a distinction without difference, but there is a distinction in the angle that we would look at things from as an industry group. So we were formed in late 2020. I came on board at the very beginning of 2021. Prior to this, I was actually working in Southern Idaho as a prosecutor in that area. Went to law school in Wyoming. Myself and the chairman of our board are both combat vets. So we say that FRAC is a veteran-led organization because the two key leaders, myself and the chairman, are both vets. And the chairman is Alex Bosco. It's public record.
Alex has been on the podcast several times. Alex is a good friend. For those that don't know, Alex Bosco started SB Tactical. The giants behind the brace movement, that is Alex Bosco and SB Tactical, and he helped to get this going. Is that right? Is that the general thing?
Yes.
Okay. So who else I know you and I have personally talked about this, but who else is involved that you can share? Because I know you can't share everybody that's involved.
Yeah. I mean, I generally try to keep our members, close hold. Now, that being said, things come out in public records when they agree to do certain things like court filings, right? So
sure,
I can recite what's in the public record, obviously. So
you're such a damn attorney.
I know, right? But yeah, so we've got a number of directors. That's all public record. So Jason Davis, he's there on our board. He's a prominent attorney, brilliant guy out of California. I really look up to him, and he represents Franklin Armory on our board. Franklin Armory is a member. They've filed lawsuit in conjunction with FRAC against the ATF. Let's see. We've got Palmetto State Armory is involved. Craig Metz, who's their federal lobbyist, is on our board. Wonderful guy. They've joined us on, it was just recently in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. If I recall, they filed as co-amicus with us. We do a lot of amicus work, and we can talk about that later.
Sure.
But,
yeah.
We got a number of people from SB that are involved individually. We've got, let's see who else.
I like that you're
See,
likely trying to process who would be upset, who wouldn't be upset,
no,
who can I share?
no, we've got B&T USA, and they filed amicus stuff with us previously. You've got Chris Bowick, the in-house counsel with Silencer Shop. He's on our
Wow.
board.
Okay.
So and
So you've got like kind of a menagerie, like a little bit of this and a little bit of that in terms of industry representation.
Yep.
So give me help me understand what's the point? What is your end goal with FRAC? Like, what are you guys trying to accomplish? Like, how does that deviate from how a civil rights group would approach an issue?
So I think that in many ways we end up getting to the same place as the civil rights groups.
When that
But
is suing the U.S. government?
suing them and trying to get beneficial results in terms of firearms. But sometimes the how you get there is different when you come at it from an industry perspective as opposed to a civil rights perspective.
Okay.
And now the one, if there's the formal answer of like what do we do? Like there's the formal answer on our charter, like improving business conditions for the industry, yada yada, right? The simplest way to put it is I want accountability, transparency, and fairness from the ATF. Now
Wow.
that sounds like a simple ask, man, but we both know that is not a simple request.
I mean, I literally was shouting. I was on a podcast last night, and obviously, guys, this is recorded ahead of when you're gonna hear this. But I was on the We Like Shooting show, and we were talking about the ATF killing the guy in, I believe it was Arkansas, with a no-knock search warrant, who they assumed was in the business of selling firearms. And all I could say was they wanted this to happen. Like, I look at the ATF as an evil organization, and it sucks that we have to go, yeah, we want them to be transparent. I mean, that would be the easy, like, oh yeah, that would be cool. Like, let's define certain things. Let's create transparency among them, but they don't seem to be interested in that. What's it like fighting those assholes?
I mean, it's a grind, man, because it's like everything seems to be a fight. Even basic requests like accountability, transparency, fairness, these sort of things, these sort of basic like good government things that people just sort of assume fall into place. Yeah, they don't.
They just don't. So,
I mean,
give
it's a
me
fight.
an example. I want to try and lay this out as clearly as possible. So, you say like fairness. To me, they've been weaponized. They're one of the many three-letter agencies that's been weaponized by whatever agenda is in the White House, right? And I'm not saying right, left, it doesn't matter. These groups seem to be weaponized, and fairness isn't part of that equation. And it seems like under the Biden administration, they have kind of gone off the rails. Have you guys noticed that? Can you comment on that?
Well, there's definitely some concerning behavior. I mean, that's I want to be careful. I'm here as CEO of FRAC, not as Travis, the private citizen. So
Sure.
I got but yeah, they've definitely some concerning behavior. When it comes to fairness and accountability and transparency, it's not just in what you do; it's in how you do it.
Okay.
And usually, the things that people do in substance or they arrive at in substance through bad form are usually not good things, right? The conclusions you arrive at through good form, through a good process that's accountable, transparent, and fair, usually tend to be more accountable, transparent, fair results at the end. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. If you use a good
So
process, you get good results. It's shocking how that works.
Right. So, if you look at like we're suing them right now. It was just argued about a week ago in front of the Eighth Circuit, our interlocutory appeal on the Brace case. Sure you're aware we've got 25 states who are leading in a lawsuit, plus a couple of companies against the ATF over their violations of law in that case. But if you look at how they for a decade or more treated this technology, and then in the flip of a switch, they made people criminals and they violated the procedural laws the APA is what it's called, the Administrative Procedures Act. They violated that, as well as, I mean, you can obviously say the Second Amendment. That's a harder reach in a legal sense because you're asking for a constitutional ruling as opposed to a statutory argument. So it's a further reach to go for a constitutional strike down than a statutory strike down.
Okay.
I certainly believe that stuff is protected by the Second Amendment. Personally, I believe that. But anyway, am I off track here?
No. I think it's interesting. We don't often get to. I mean, as far as I'm aware, you guys are the only ones doing anything in this space. There are other groups that claim to, like the NSSF. I know you can't say any of this. I have seen the NSSF fail repeatedly as the quote unquote trade organization for the gun industry, and they have remained silent on issues such as the Brace case. And I mean, I've harassed them publicly about it. What is it like sort of carrying the weight of fighting this? We've talked to Alex about this from the perspective of FRAC and your organization. What is this like? Are you carrying the world on your back?
No, I mean, look, there's a lot of legal fights going on. We're like far from the only people that are fighting the fight in some sense, right? There's
from a trade perspective.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think one of the challenges, and I'm not saying, obviously a lot of people, we have an outpouring of support on the Brace fight. But when it comes just more generally issues than you see in the industry, it's very easy to run into sort of a tragedy of the commons situation.
Explain that.
Yeah, so everybody knows that this is bad. Something is going to be bad, and it's going to be maybe catastrophic. But it's like if it affects everybody, it affects nobody uniquely, right? So so when you try to rally support, like, hey, I need to put some people together and let's file in court on this, let's do this, and everybody's kind of like, well, but why me? Why is that a me thing as opposed to it's an everybody thing? Well, somebody's got to step up, man. So that's the challenge, I think, with a lot of these things. One of the cases that I've looked at recently is, I think it's the First Circuit. It's either the first or the third, I can't remember, but it's Massachusetts, whatever circuit they're in. There was
we'll call that the worst circuit.
Right. So there's a case pending right now. It's pending certiorari in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. Well, they've requested to be, they've petitioned for cert, right? So it hasn't been granted as far as I know. But the nation of Mexico, the foreign country, the foreign government, sued a number of gun companies in federal district court in Massachusetts.
What?
Not joking. This happened.
How's that a thing?
So they bring this lawsuit against them.
Uh-huh.
And there's all these complications dealing with the PLCAA and articulating the nuances to the exceptions and stuff. And then there's even further complications because at the motion to dismiss phase, you have to take certain claims as true and then assess whether or not those claims have legal validity, regardless of them actually being true or not. There's some procedural nuances when you're at a motion to dismiss phase as opposed to summary judgment or trial phase. There's some distinctions, but anyway, the circuit court kicked some of the claims by Mexico, and they allowed some of them to survive. In other words, the gun companies haven't lost the case. The case is continuing, right?
Okay.
And so that aspect is being appealed to the Supreme Court. And the case caption, as I recall, is Estados Unidos, Mexico versus Smith & Wesson et al. So,
oh boy.
Yeah, it's a mouthful, but there's a number of companies, not just Smith & Wesson as a defendant.
Right.
There's a number, right? A number of companies.
What are they claiming? What's the issue that the entire country of Mexico is claiming against all these gun companies?
Basically, something to the effect, as I recall, that guns end up in Mexico and do bad things, right?
Yeah, the ATF does that.
Well, I mean, that's a whole.
I thought that was common knowledge.
That's a whole.
Come on, Mexico, get your shit together.
So, well,
Where's Eric Holder when you need him? He'll explain it.
the ATF is not one of the defendants, from what I recall, man. They were not sued in this lawsuit, right? So,
are they essentially claiming that these gun companies are responsible for getting guns into Mexico? Is that what their end argument is?
There's all sorts of like common law type claims out there. In I don't remember the exact claims that they make, but there's some really hazy sort of the common law is a very hazy thing when it comes to common law tort actions. So like a public nuisance, these sort of things. Like it's a question for the jury, which you know what I mean. But the interesting thing that really stood out to me, one of them, is when the circuit court was reciting the arguments in their analysis, in their ruling, they mentioned that Mexico, at least in part, hung its hat on the fact that the U.S. gun industry uses a system of middleman distributors, right? It's very rare that the manufacturer does a direct sale to the end customer. Very rare. I would say, with the exception of certain military contracts or maybe large-scale law enforcement procurements, that might be the only exception to like a direct manufacturer FFL to end user, right? So
I can think of maybe like one or two brands that are small that do that sort of thing because they haven't figured out distribution. Because I've seen it from the consumer side. There are a couple that might do it that way, but even then, I'm not positive that that's exactly how they do it.
Well, they have to go through a middleman. The point I'm getting at is the use of middlemen in the distribution network for lawful firearms commerce. We call that federal law because the FFL system requires you to go to FFLs, at least for handguns, in the state of residence of the end consumer, the purchaser, right? So it's not like you really have the luxury of just doing direct sales to everybody. So the fact that they're trying to assert that is evidence of or an indicator of some sort of nefarious intent, the fact that the industry uses distribution networks, that's literally built into the law. Our system of FFL
we
transfers.
Would love to go direct, right? Duh, we would love to not have to go through FFLs and dismantle that nonsense. I mean, I'll say that. I would. Okay.
These sort of vague arguments that anyway, the case is very concerning because I foresee a world in which if that sort of case is allowed to continue and become, I don't know, a wealth pump of sorts, an wealth extraction mechanism from our industry. I mean, how many industries do you know that the U.S. government would invite into domestic courts? Excuse me, the U.S. government would invite a foreign country into a domestic American court to politically target a disfavored industry or whatnot. I mean, how many industries are subject to that sort of treatment?
Maybe the oil industry.
Yeah, you're right. Maybe. Right, like guns and gasoline, man. So. Anyway, that's one of the frustrating points, man. We see stuff like that.
Shocking.
Yeah. Check out the docket on that. I mean, you could probably hop on Google and find out the case caption for.
Yeah, it's Taco Bell v. Smith & Wesson. I'm kidding. That's not what it's called. That's not what it's called. I find it fascinating that we have gotten to that point. And we also don't know. My brain immediately goes conspiracy theory, and that somebody on our side is pushing the buttons on their side, saying, hey, we'll give you XYZ. We'll funnel this money. We'll put our headquarters in Mexico to build our widgets if you do this thing over here against these people. Lobbying essentially in a foreign country to create I don't know if there's a term for that, but it just sounds like fuckery. That's I don't know if that's the legal term.
That's not a legal term, but it is definitely an accurate term sometimes. So
I mean, dude, what the fuck? What? How? And that also let's also step back for a second. That opens the door for foreign entities across the board. Like if we're setting the precedent and saying Mexico as a nation can come in and mess with our commerce and our not only just lawful behaviors, and because they feel like it, that opens the doorway into other nations trying to control us, and then we end up like this even more neutered nation controlled by foreign interest. What? Why? That's atrocious.
That's, and on that note, it's one of the other frustrating points that I've had to deal with is the self-defeating bureaucracy. And like, I'm not even talking about like on the merits of is gun control good or bad, or does it work or does it not work? I'm talking like before you even get to that basic red tape nonsense that is applied for no conceivable purpose. And the easy example that comes to my mind is ATF ruling 2014-1 that deals with the transfer of machine guns within the industry to when there's government contracts in place. So basically, you have two types of foreign sales, right? You have Let me back up. 922.0 prohibits machine guns. There's an exemption for pre-86 NFA registered. There's an exemption for when it's state, local, or federal government, or under the authority of the state, local, or federal government, right? Now, that term under the authority of, right? So what is that? How are we going to interpret that? Well, so they come out with this ruling a decade ago now, that when it comes to foreign sales, only foreign sales that are through the Foreign Military Sales Program, right? So under the FMS option, the U.S. government is actually, for all intents and purposes, the customer of the industry. The fact that they're going to turn around and sell it to whoever through their program is really of little. That's between the government and that other government, right? The U.S. government and whoever, right?
So I want to understand that a little bit better. So if one of our allies wants firearms, they would have to go through that FMS program through the United States government. Is that accurate?
That's one way. That's one of the ways. So this is I'm trying to explain this out. So they've got that option, and if that's the option they go with, then under 2014-1, if it's considered a transfer to the U.S. government, and so a manufacturer is able to transfer the machine gun during the manufacturing process. So if the Department of Defense says, I want a belt-fed machine gun from this company, make me 1,000 of them. Okay. Well, they're able to transfer out that receiver to get coded by like a subcontractor and then transfer it back. And the ATF will approve those Form 3s with the paperwork attached, because ultimately those products are being made under the umbrella of a U.S. government contract.
Okay. I get it.
Right. And that also applies to transfers of end weapons that are going to be incorporated for testing and evaluation into like a larger platform, like an Apache gunship or a tank, armored vehicles, these sort of things. Now, if it's not through the Foreign Military Sales Program, the other option is a direct foreign sale that still has to be U.S. government approved. Like, they may not be the middleman on it, but the State Department, the Director of Defense Trade Controls, has to review that license, right? Like, that process still gets reviewed by DDTC, and I'm sure they consult with the DoD on that process before blessing off on that foreign sales contract. And a lot of the distinction between like FMS and direct foreign sale, a lot of it comes down to like appropriations and money availability, like money flows in the military industry. So, that's a whole nother topic there. But when it's the direct foreign sales option, the U.S. government, the ATF will not allow those intermediary transfers to take place.
What?
You have to have a babysitter.
What is a babysitter in that equation?
Yeah, the babysitter is, let's say I'm company A and I make a chain gun, and you're company B and you make an Apache, and I want to transfer my chain. You've contracted me to make the chain gun to put on your Apache, and then whatever country has a contract to purchase the Apaches, and they are like approved by the State Department, they're approved by DOD. Everybody's given the green light. Here comes ATF. No, transfer denied. You cannot transfer the chain gun to to be incorporated into the Apache because it is not under the authority of the U.S. government in the eyes of ATF, even though the government blessed off on the foreign sale to that third country government, an ally, for instance. We'll just say Ukraine, for instance. Okay, that's an easy example. Ukraine. I'm not trying to get political on that. Just saying there's a war going on.
It's a relevant example.
Relevant example. They want to buy a Bradley fighting vehicle, and they want to buy it on a direct foreign sale. For instance, hypothetical example. They go to the company that makes Bradleys, and that company that makes Bradleys goes to whatever subcontractor they might use. I'm assuming they might use a subcontractor to make the chain gun for the turret. Well, because it's a direct foreign sale, you're not allowed to transfer that to be incorporated into the gun. So what you have to do is, to not be a transfer, is you have to send a physical babysitter from the company that made the MG. They have to send a babysitter to sit with, like, physically, like
so the difference is you have a person present or not.
Exactly. That's what it is. And now
that is absurd.
It's absurd. Instead of just transferring within the industry, right? We're not talking about like Apaches getting sold out in the back alley, right? Like, we're talking about like industry,
it's not
defense.
Sold in friggin' Detroit.
Right. Like, this is industry and for military sales. I mean, it's a legitimate thing. So, it's frustrating, man. And I've brought this stuff up. I briefed congressional staff on this over a year ago. And we've seen this coming. Like, the industry has known this thing would be a frustrating issue, but it was kind of like one of those, like, this will be an issue, but we didn't really have a big war with a foreign ally on the table. We had the 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan, but we were the predominant party in that, right?
Right. So this is like, hey, that's a problem for future us. The can got kicked down the road, and now we're seeing it.
Yeah, and it's frustrating because that the operative term, the under the authority of the U.S. government, could have easily been interpreted the other way to not make this nonsense. If they had said, if ATF had said, an approved export license to a military ally approved by the U.S. State Department, we're going to call that under the authority of the U.S. government. And then you can get
it is technically.
Well, I think so. I agree. But ATF says no. And the issue is the incentive structures, right? The incentive and disincentive. How many ATF agents you think are going to get fired or be put in jail if again, not getting political, but if the war in Ukraine, if we're unable to meet supply and demand for any war, for any foreign situation, if we're unable to meet that, if the industry is hampered in meeting that, if our nation is not able to meet that, is the ATF going to be held accountable for their red tape obstruction of probably not.
I mean, no, as far as I've seen in my years, there has not been accountability in any three-letter agency. I've never seen it. It's not like, we get reimbursed when they waste a bunch of people's time with bump stocks. It's not like they're, how many times have we seen, and this is obviously consumer side, but how many times have we seen, you can have this thing or destroy it. We don't give a shit if it costs you a ton of money. But where's the accountability in all of that sort of baseless action? It doesn't exist, and I assume that continues into, like, how? That's I just get so, like, exasperated by all of this.
Yeah. So you asked me, is it frustrating? What is it like? It's those sort of situations where it's just like, mind numbing.
So, like, in that particular instance, do they have some sort of reasoning for how they got there?
They're just trying to be strict. I mean, I guess they're just trying to be strict on their interpretations of, it's machine guns, right? And they're, regardless of what people think about, I'm not trying to get into the discussion of, like, I have my opinion on should people be able to own, the Second Amendment, right? But without even getting into that, right? Without even going that far, the law allows militaries to have these things. Like, that is not in dispute. And so the fact that the ATF, their sole contribution to the situation in Ukraine or Taiwan is like red tape obstruction of the industry, right? And then when you see other headlines where it's like disparities in manufacturing capacity between our side and the other side. And again, I don't know exactly what the truth is on that. There's so much, disinformation out there,
Right.
but like, to the extent that there is a disparity, it's extremely frustrating to see that some of that we've brought upon ourselves by like runaway rogue red tape that
It's
serves
just
no public safety benefit to obstruct defense contractor A and defense contractor B from like transferring machine gun receivers to be coded.
all I can think of is who the hell is suffering from that crime that they are trying to prevent. I very much fall into the no victim, no crime type mentality. And that seems like a victimless issue. The transfer of a machine gun receiver to be coded or something similar, treated, whatever the hell,
Mm-hmm.
get something installed. Who gives a shit? It's the idea is just absolutely ridiculous. And the fact that ATF is involved in foreign commerce is fascinating to me.
Well, they view it as domestic commerce, right? Just understand we're talking about two entities that are here in America. Before the item gets put out on final export, there's the manufacturing process, because not everybody's a big enough company to do everything in house, right? Like,
right, but at the end of the day, the customer is not inside the U.S. Like the end receiver of the end company or entity that is receiving the firearm, and that should be looked at as part of the manufacturing process.
it
Like,
is.
what the
Yeah.
fuck?
Yeah. But they're just like, well, that constitutes a transfer, and we're not going to allow that unless it's for a U.S. government entity, not a U.S. government approved entity, a U.S. government entity. So anyway,
That shit doesn't make
2014-1.
any damn sense.
Yeah, I mean, take a look at it sometime. All right. So what else you got?
So I want to try and understand where things are with braces, because I know that's a continuing fight. Like, that fight is not done. And I know you guys are sort of at the center of it. Can you explain sort of where we've gotten to and then where this is going?
Sure. So there's a number of cases across the country. You got ours up here in North Dakota. I'm in North Dakota, by the way. That's why I'm wearing the long clothes today. It's a little chilly outside.
Well, a little
So
brisk.
right, we've got ours going. We're at the 8th Circuit right now on interlocutory appeal for a denied preliminary injunction, and all that. That's a lot of lawyer words, but what it means is we took an immediate appeal prior to the end of the case at the district court. We took an immediate appeal to get the higher court to relook at the denial of our motion for preliminary injunction. So that's where we're at. We're waiting on a ruling on that. It was argued. The recording's out there on the 8th Circuit's website. We argued that about a week ago. And then down in Texas, you've got a number of cases. I think like 4 or 5 off the top of my head, something like that.
That's where I believe the FPC case is there. GOA might have one there, right?
Yeah, a whole bunch of entities are working with individuals and groups down there. But there is a number of injunctions down there that are tailored in various ways. But one of them is the rule being stayed in its entirety. So you ask where we're at, in terms of, from a consumer perspective, you've got the courts down there that have issued a number of injunctions protecting people while the cases are still being processed in the courts.
Do you think there will be more attempts soon from ATF on accessories of all types?
I mean, I think the easy answer is like yes, right? We can just assume the ATF is not going to just like wake up one day and decide that we've been doing it wrong all these years. So I don't foresee them like changing course. But I am careful that I don't want to like try to over crystal ball this and say what they're going to do next. One thing they've got pending is the FFL rule.
What's that?
The what constitutes being engaged in the business of dealing in firearms. So like when you would need an FFL, and there's I read an article about the scuttlebutt that's going around, basically that they're going to release some massive rule that basically says you always need an FFL if you're going to sell, something to that effect. Well, ultimately we're going to have to see what they do. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Just wait and see what final rule they release. But yeah, I mean, you see scuttlebutt like that and you want to kind of like, no, they won't do that because that's unreasonable. Well, funny thing
that's
about
how we got here.
Right. Funny thing about unreasonableness, it seems to be an MO. So yeah.
Yeah, that was another thing we were discussing with that case in Arkansas last night. And I was told, and I didn't realize this, that there is some level of a definition in the Safer Communities Act that was passed. And it's basically like if you're in the operation for profit, with the end goal being profit, that means you're in the business of. How does that particular, like the Safer Communities Act, how does that affect this? Because I was under the impression that it wasn't defined. And then I was told it was in this other act. Like, how does all this shit match up?
Yeah, that's my recollection, that they did some elaboration with that Safer Communities Act. I don't remember all the nuanced details on that.
Right.
So I don't want to get too specific when I don't have it in front of me right now. So yeah, there's some definitions that they did tweak, I think, in that act, but the rule, the proposed rule is out there. I mean, I actually drafted FRAC's comment for that one when it was open for public comment, and it's pretty. Like for instance, there's all sorts of vague stuff that the ATF had in this proposed rule that could
be interpreted.
Right, as per usual, that could be interpreted as dissuading people from like liquidating all or a part of their gun collection through even through an FFL, right? Like there was no delineation between private sale and going to an FFL, right? Because in theory, if you sell guns, it doesn't matter if you're going to an FFL or private people. If you're doing it for profit repeatedly, that's engaged in the business of, And so technically speaking, it doesn't matter if it's to an FFL or to private parties. But in terms of the supposed public safety stuff that the ATF preaches, right? They should have some sort of acknowledgement. Like, we're not going to go to, you don't have to like worry if you hit financial difficulties and you have to liquidate, a portion of your collection for whatever financial reason. And if somebody does what I think would be the responsible thing and go to an FFL, instead of, you're not going to sell them out on the street, maybe they go to their local FFL and liquidate them that way. I think most people, even the ATF, would hopefully look at that as a responsible course of action.
Huh. It's interesting because all I can think is the end goal with that is to stifle people buying, because if you are permanently stuck with an item and you do not have any way to get rid of it because you may be seen as in the business of, if you sell something, that means you're stuck with it forever, like a freaking tattoo. So right. All the bad guns that you've ever bought, all the trash that's out there, that is something that is, the end result of that is stifling the gun industry.
Right. Well, and also the mistreatment of consumers. And the example I mentioned in my public comment, or FRAC's public comment, is a lot of college communities have these programs they call the Safe Ride program. I don't know if you've heard of these. It's like,
no.
Basically, I mean, they call them different things, but I think of it as like a safe ride program where there's certain, like, almost like a bus stop, but it's a safe ride stop,
Oh, I see.
where
So
people can.
basically, yeah, like, preventing against violence and things like that on college campuses or around colleges. Is that the idea?
No, it's to prevent drunk driving.
Oh,
And so
okay. Well,
I'm
sure.
giving you an analogy that's not in the gun side of things, right? So,
Sure.
and sure, yeah, it'll prevent violence in the sense of like people walking home and late at night because they can't drive, are vulnerable, right? But predominantly, I think of it as a, hey, don't feel that you should drive a car if you've been drinking. Go to one of these places, and then a ride will pick you up, every 30 minutes or whatever, and take you home. And that's like, it's a reasonable program, right? Like, but imagine if the police went to those places and said, man, we're just going to watch these places, and then when people walk up drunk, we arrest them for being drunk in public.
I mean, that
What
kind of
would
sounds like police already do shit like that. But yes, I get your point. That's bad.
Right, but what would that do to the public policy intention of a program like a safe ride program, where it's like, do this thing so you don't drink and drive, but if you do the thing, we're going to target you for this other thing, right? That it's far more minor, right? Like a person standing there who's inebriated is far less of an issue than somebody who gets in a car inebriated, right? So there's that public policy mismatch, right? You cannot have a police department that targets those places and also a police department that says they don't want drunk driving, and I see that sort of conflict with that proposed rule they put out of, if you, the ATF, want to keep firearms away from prohibited possessors, which is ostensibly the ATF's objective when it comes to firearms transfers in the consumer market, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they want to do that, why would you put people in a situation where they feel that they will be in jeopardy if they go to an FFL to liquidate their gun collection or part of it or do a sale, whatever, for whatever reason? Because now there's paperwork, right? If you have X number of guns and you got to sell some of them to pay the rent that month because you hit hard times, whatever's going on, if you go to a dealer, there's paperwork now, right? It's on their A&D book. It hits their A&D book when you sell it to them. If the ATF puts out this rule the way it was written in its draft stage or proposed rule stage, if they put it out without any sort of safe harbor or acknowledgement of, hey, if you go to an FFL to sell it, no harm. No, we're not even going to come for you. If they don't do that, they're going to disincentivize people, because now that person who doesn't want to necessarily sell it out on the street, if they're in desperate situations, like, there's the risk that they may bypass going to an FFL and having any paperwork and do the no paperwork option, right? Which would be counterintuitive to the ATF's ostensible goal of background checks.
I see. I don't think their goal is background checks. I think their goal is gun control. I think their goal is to disarm the American public.
Yeah.
Ostensible
Goal.
Yeah. Like, I swear this it's maybe people in the food industry feel this way, and I had somebody that is in the food industry talking about this, how sort of I don't know if it was the FDA or it was something along the lines of a government entity was in the business of stifling individual consumers from doing stuff that in normal thought processes would be considered legal. Like they don't want you to have guns, and I've never seen anybody oppress a individual group in the United States like the ATF does. Just blanket F everybody. You're not allowed to have this thing that you bought that we said was legal. At what point does the ATF get held accountable? When do they get dragged through the mud for even proposing this bullshit? Because at the end of the day, I don't think consumers, you can obviously speak to what the industry thinks of this, but I think consumers are effing sick of being prosecuted blindly by unelected bureaucrats. We're tired of this. And at a certain point, you have to go, well, fuck that guy. fuck them and the horse they rode in on, hold them responsible for prosecuting us, right? Like, when does that happen, Travis?
Oh, man, your guess is as good as mine. I mean, but I think, the incentive structures, I think, like I mentioned maybe a few minutes ago, we're talking about the mismatch in the incentive structures between different agencies and then, our nation. I think that ultimately you have to sort of marry up incentive structures in a positive way to get everybody. In the military, there's this concept of unity of action, right? So
It sounds like a
where
military term.
right, what it's like people acting in furtherance of a unified objective and in furtherance of getting to positive results in whatever their mission is, and
Sure,
you have
everybody
to have
moving in the same direction. I got you.
right, and so you can't have people, you cannot have like, well, this one person over here has an entirely different incentive structure independent of helping the team achieve the mission, right? And that person could be incentivized to do things that are actually counter to the mission, right? So that's think along those lines, and maybe you'll come up with some solutions. But I don't see it right now, man.
It sucks, man. I just, all I could think of is, we have a community of people that are growing progressively more and more angry, and the boot gets pushed further and further on their neck. And I use that phrase, the knee on the back of the neck. I use that purposely. And at a certain point, something bad's gonna fucking happen. I can feel it. And it's fucking scary, dude. Nobody wants to quote unquote fire the first shot, but this shit is fucking scary. How does you talk to the gun industry? I speak with consumers a lot more than I talk to the industry. You deal with the legal side of the industry. What is the industry afraid of right now? Like, what are they genuinely concerned about from your perspective?
I mean, obviously there's overlap, so
Yeah,
it's hard to answer that because the industry is not like a fictitious blob in the sky, right? It's people, right? It's human beings with names, you know what I mean? That make up the industry, right? Yeah, we have corporate entities, right? That's a legal fiction. That's something that exists on paper, right? But it's still humans, right? So what are they afraid of? What I think that most of the people I've spoken to, at least on a human level, they share the concerns of the consumers, of the people. I mean, I hear it's the same concerns. Now, in the business context, the big concern I hear is the erosion and undermining of the PLCAA, for instance,
oh my gosh, yeah.
the weaponization of the rule of law, namely the civil law, right? And I know we talk a lot about weaponization of criminal law, but the civil law has its own, I mean, that's its own thing too, right? So
Okay.
the use of civil law in terms of bankrupting, right? And again, that case we talked about earlier, Mexico versus Smith and Wesson et al., prime example of the weaponization of civil law. And with the PLCAA, we've seen the exceptions to that are supposed to be, well, they were intended to be, I think, common sense exceptions to the blanket protection of lawful commerce. And an easy example would be like products liability because you make a gun and the gun like explodes in somebody's hand, right, and hurts them. Like that's not the type of conduct that is intended to be protected, right? Like that is traditional basic products liability. Like, did you use the correct metals? Did something happen? And
Sure.
that's right. What's trying to be protected is the sort of logic of, that drunk driver drove your car and hurt somebody. We want you to pay for making the car that the drunk driver used. Like that sort of logic that the anti-gun crowd applies to the industry. If a criminal uses a gun, we want the gun company to somehow be liable for what the criminal did. That is what the PLCAA was intended to protect from. And we've seen the state courts, namely the state courts, federal courts too, but we've seen them start to chip away at that by making rulings about these exceptions, right? The little exceptions that were drafted intended to be based on common sense things, stretched out a golf ball hole to fit a basketball through it, right? Mm-hmm. So we've seen that take place in the state courts. There's a bill that was introduced in Congress a few months ago on the House side. We're in the process right now of getting it dropped on the Senate side. This is our bill to provide for removal jurisdiction to federal court of actions involving entities protected by the PLCAA. So when they raise a PLCAA defense, that should be a basis to basically pull things to the federal court to get in front of a federal judge to hear that out. So, there's things that people are trying to do, but in this current environment right now, I mean, it's not much is moving, John.
Yeah. It seems like Congress, like any elected body, just seems like all they want to do is get sound bites against the other side and like dunk on each other and not actually do their damn jobs. Like I have yet to see any real movement in any one direction, whether that's in the sort of left or the right. Like we don't really see movement. We see argument and pundits talking about stuff, but no real actual movement, no real actual accountability. Like you talked about, the core mission of what you guys are doing. I find it fascinating that these people continue to just soak up money, gain wealth, and oppress. And it's not oppression by I don't look at it as oppression by law or anything like that. While that does take place, that's more of like the ATF loves to do that, right? But the way I look at this is oppression by not moving, stagnation.
Well, a lot of the stagnations in Congress, and then obviously the executive branch. They had the veto power up there anyway.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, administrative bloat, red tape, and again, we're talking about that disjointed incentive and disincentive structures that erode any sense of like unity of effort, right? At some point, that's I agree. I will use the word. I think the situation is untenable. I mean, good word. You have your way of articulating it. I got to be a little careful, but when I crystal ball this, John, I think it's simply untenable.
So when we look at what you guys are doing in Washington, for example, how much of that can you talk about? You guys meet with people. I see the pictures on social media. You're pushing, you're educating. What are you doing right now? What's going on that you can talk about?
Sure. We've done our staff briefings on like the photos you've seen. We've done staff briefings to educate congressional staff on. I mean, obviously, we did one on the arm brace. I did one on the 2014-1, the transfer of machine guns between defense contractors and how that's relevant to the situation in Ukraine. I brought on CEOs of member companies that operate in that space and had them give real world examples, like on a video screen, holding up, a receiver of an MG, being like, this MG is going to go to a foreign military or to the U.S. military. And before it does, we have to get it coded, and these other people do that. And then we have to put it together. And then we, right. They went through that and they're like, but if it's in this situation to a foreign military, like babysitter has to go with the gun. They can't have a transfer that takes place approved by the ATF. So we've done our best to educate people. And it's frustrating, man. I mean, it really is. Like some of these things they're like low hanging fruit, like 2014-1, Steve Diedelbach, if you're out there watching, man, Just
Oh,
reverse
man.
that rule. Just reverse it, dude. Like just reverse it. Like, I don't know. This doesn't have to be a complicated thing. Just you
reverse
have a rule that interprets the under the authority of one way, and it's leading to problems, and you can switch that, and nothing bad will happen, and it'll just help our allies.
Everything
So,
will be fine. Also, Dettelbach, if you're watching, go fuck yourself. Just saying, for the record, that is not the the FRAC doesn't. I'm saying that Jon Patton is saying, "Go fuck yourself, Steve Dettelbach." I'm just saying, just to hammer that home.
one of the other issues that we see is
you're a pro at this. I love it.
Yeah, before I forget though, right? One of the other issues that we see is the abuse of the technology assessment process. So, like the FAT-D litter rulings.
Oh, yeah. Talk to me about that, man.
The Firearms and Ammunition Technologies Division does these letter rulings where, when the industry wants to release new technology, right? Could be like everything from like a trigger to some sort of other accessory device to a whole gun, right? With how complicated the law is, before they just say, we think this falls under this regulatory area, as opposed to, we think it's GCA only, not NFA, or we think it's nothing, it's just an accessory, mail it, right? Before they make that decision, they want to get that formally on paper assessed and blessed off on by ATF, so that if you gamble on your own and you gamble wrong, there's big consequences for you and for your company, right? So there's not technically a requirement to do that, but like it's a de facto requirement because of the potential consequences of not doing that, right? So these companies, the companies will go to FAT-D and they'll get a letter ruling. And we've seen them abuse that process. We've seen them refuse to issue rulings on things for a protracted amount of time, which is in many ways sort of like killing firearms technology before it's born.
Mm-hmm.
There's a word for that. I'm not going to use the word, but there's a word. But it's not right. I mean, it's that's not the role of FAT-D when assessing technology, to decide, we don't like this technology, so we're not going to issue you the letter even telling you what regulatory regime it's under. So that's
that
one way
reminds me. I spoke with an industry friend of mine, and I'm intentionally going to be vague about this. So I spoke with this friend, and they were importing a gun that was manufactured overseas, and their request for importation was sitting at ATF for years before they approved it. Years. So the gun that was originally, that got approved for importation was already out of date and not super duper relevant when they allowed that. And that reminds me a lot of what FAT-D does, just letting shit just sit on shelves, because if it's not approved, then essentially it's not getting sold because of what they've created, this de facto thing that you just talked about. So if it's not getting sold, then they are still, it's basically like a silent disapproval. That's scary, dude.
Yeah.
That's fucking bad. Is there anything that like consumers can do to fight back against that?
Well, tell your congressman to support the ATF Accountability Act. So we introduced that last session and this session. It's basically a bill to amend federal law to create internal appeals process, administrative appeals within ATF, and to create more checks and balances on that FAT-D stuff, basically, to put it simple. And I know that, again, this is an example where the consumer says, well, that's like an industry side thing. It is 100%. But before the consumer will ever have anything in their hand, it has to go through the industry, right? So if we can't make it and we can't sell it, you ain't going to be able to buy it. So the ATF Accountability Act is absolutely relevant to consumers and industry alike.
And that's something that you guys are working to push through.
Yeah, it's been introduced in last session and this session, but I mean, you can look around and read the room and know how that's probably going to go.
I mean,
So,
we were just talking about it. Stagnation. Nothing's happening.
so I mean, but I intend to get it introduced next session as well, and hopefully the next congressional session will say hopefully the chessboard is a little different in this country.
Yeah.
And we can actually do beneficial things for the industry, for the people, establish some unity of purpose, some unity of effort, some unity of action as a nation, as an industry, as a people, and actually really get things done.
Well said. I want to ask you, how, like, is there a way for consumers? Obviously, you guys deal with the industry primarily. Is there a way for consumers to support your efforts other than, talking to their congressman?
Yeah, they can donate. We're always grateful for donations. FRACaction.org is a donate button on there. Very appreciative. We've got a number of people that do donate, so I'm very grateful for that.
Do you do like memberships or anything like that?
No, we do memberships, but it's only for the industry.
Okay.
So,
and how do you classify that?
Business entities that operate within the firearms space, and basically our board will evaluate that when they assess applicants for membership. It all goes to our board of directors when a company wants to join.
Okay, I want to join. We'll have to talk about that. I think that would be interesting from the media side. If that makes sense for you guys, I think that would be interesting.
Okay.
So fracaction.org is the website, guys. These guys are busy, and as a newer organization, I think they are one to pay attention to, because they have getting shit done in their mindset. None of these guys like to sit around and just do nothing. I've met a bunch of the people that are involved with the organization personally. Prior to the organization being founded, I knew some of these guys, and I am excited to see you guys push back, because that's what we need. That's everybody. I think we can all agree pushing back against the bullshit is what we all need. Is there anything you want to add, Travis?
Check out our website. We've got litigation stuff on there. We got our amicus briefs on there. We do a lot of work right now, not only with the two lawsuits. We have 2 lawsuits ongoing right now where we're a named party, but we have a number of other suits that are other folks' suits that we filed in as amicus on, including in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. So please check that stuff out. And if you like what we're doing, please drop us a donation. We're always grateful for that. So
yeah. And Travis, for those of you that will be at GunCon, Travis will be on the 2A panel so that you can ask him questions yourself, whether you're in person, watching it online. Travis will be a part of that, and it's going to be rad. I cannot freaking wait for GunCon. Travis, thanks so much for your time today, man. I know you're super busy. I appreciate you coming on here and kind of walking me through. I am a little bit of a smooth brain, so I appreciate the education.
Thanks for having me on, John. I appreciate it.
Hell yeah. All right, guys. Be sure to check out blackoutcoffee.com/TGC. Use that link. That is the most helpful way to support us and support a company that says stay awake, not woke. And go to Vertex, VERTX.com. Use the code TGC. Get yourself a discount. We appreciate it. See you next time, guys.